Light of Truth, The Grail Message by Abdushin. And we have a topic every week. The topic for today is, it's a bit of a long one, but I'm going to say it, what it is to worship other gods. So I'm going to repeat that again, what it is to worship other gods. That's our topic for discussion tonight. And you can join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us in here in the studio, the UK number, it is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're on outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. Again, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. So to start with, I would like to first of all, I want to just check how my colleagues are doing and where they are and so on. So first of all, I'll go to Brother Gregory. Brother Gregory, please tell us where you are and how's the weather where you are.
Well, it has been bright here in Brussels and very warm, just like summer.
Okay. Yeah. And Brother Rainer, how about you? Where are you and how's the weather where you are?
Well, I'm in sunny Münster in Germany. We had another summer's day. I think soon the palm trees will grow here and the tourists will flock here instead of going to the Mediterranean. I'm waiting for the Italians to come here and make a holiday here.
Okay.
In any case, it's quite lovely here, and I personally am enjoying the hot weather very much.
Okay, and guess what? It's the same here in London. It's overcast at the moment, but in the day it's been really warm. Just like summer, exactly as you said, and you could see the people were dressed like that as well. So yes, that's this is Brother Saad in London. So just to let you know where I am from and where I am. So okay, so what I'm going to do now is to start with what is the Grail Message. The Grail Message in the Light of Truth by Abdushin is a spiritual knowledge of life. It offers an explanation of the world, a picture of creation on the basis of natural laws. Its lectures contain valuable basic elements as a help in life, for through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail Message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized and thereby the purpose of our whole life. Okay, just my colleagues, I'm just hearing some background sound, so just put yourself on mute. So please, yeah. Thank you. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, every reader has the opportunity to discover through the intuitive perception if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises, where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. And I'd like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail Message, Abdushin. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail Message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole, without leaving any gaps. Again and again, in all the happenings, the reader will come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change even one single sentence. The word of the Grail Message lives, so that it permits only those people who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. And I'd like to give you one more quote from the author. I wish to fill the gaps which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So, dear listeners, just to remind you, the topic for discussion tonight is what it is to worship other gods. And we'd love you to join us with any questions or comments. The number again, in UK it is 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 004479 444 31366. Again, you can call, text or use WhatsApp. So I'm going to start with Brother Gregory with my first question. It seems quite a broad question, but I will start with it. What is worship? That's to Brother Gregory.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Oh, yes, very clear. Very clear.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, the question which I will repeat is, what is worship? Basically, worship is a reverence. To give unqualified reference to that which provides all that a human being needs in order to exist. Only that can one provide unqualified reverence, because you have the situation that the human being depends on what the source provides, and therefore it is right to revere the source that provides all that the human spirit needs for its existence.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. And you remind me of the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods but me. And almost, well, there's so many things I would like to go into, but I want to really say, people do worship other things, and so almost I want to ask, why is that tendency there? I want to go back to you, Brother Gregory, on that. So that you have said it should be reference to the source, and I assume that you mean, when you refer to the source, you mean the Almighty God Father. So but we know, and then there's this first commandment also saying, "Thou shalt worship no other gods but me." So, what do you think it is that leads man to not recognize the source or forget the source and have this tendency to go elsewhere?
Well, that's an interesting question, but one can answer it quite directly. It's indolence and taking things for granted. And that's why man goes elsewhere. Too lazy to continue to examine the way the power or the energy that streams through creation comes to it, and how to make beneficial use of it. So one will say it's indolence that makes man, search in some other areas. Or you have another scenario where man is caught up with with other activities in such a way that he loses sight of the source. But all this has one root: indolence, not being able to exert itself enough to recognize that this power streams from distances which is incomprehensible to him, and most of the time, man is easily distracted. So one may say indolence. On another hand, one can say distraction, just like a child is easily distracted and forgets about his home. So these are likely to be the two main things that makes man to sort of deviate and focus on that which is not very beneficial, because it is not matured enough to understand that it needs to be connected to the source always.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I want to move to you now, Brother Rainer. And I think Brother Gregory mentioned something about forgetting God and indolence there. And we know in the world of today that, well, let's say there's a section of people who, God is not even in their minds. It's like just enjoying themselves and having a good life, enjoying them earthly things, really. And I could say that's become their God. And so what I would like to ask you there is, when they say, well, let's just talk about, let's say, how the world is today. Let's go there. So you see people worshipping, for example, the, pop stars, or even sports stars or film stars, things like that. And they look up, even they want to follow them in their fashion and how they behave and all sort of things. So, Brother Rainer, is there something that those sort of people are meant to set examples? And if they were really like a good example, maybe that is, I don't want to maybe use the word worship, but I mean that's how people behave, isn't it? That they look at them in that way, they like role models. So just, I know it's not right to call it worship, but that's actually in a way how they practice it, because I think they know better than that. So, Brother, I know a question really to you there is, are these people meant to be role models in some way and maybe help humanity in some way in the in the proper way to worship? I'm just asking that really. I don't know if it's just as that. What do you think about that? Hello, Brother Ron, I think you're on mute.
1 second, here I am.
Okay, you're back. I just want to check. Did you get Okay.
Well, the question is really, what is the golden calf, and why do human beings worship that golden calf? That was after Moses came down from the mountain and came down with the 10 commandments, and also with that first commandment, which is, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods but me. And he came down and he had to observe that the people were dancing and worshipping that golden calf. And the question quite rightfully is, what is that golden calf? And of course, in this respect, it is not meant, by it are not meant the other gods, for example, the gods the Greek had, but it is meant, what do the human beings put on a pedestal and start worshipping it? And this is very important to understand. What is it? We as human beings, having that free will, we can decide what is important for us and what we dedicate our time, our effort to, and what is upmost in our consideration. It's sometimes very unflattering. It might be, and sometimes it's persons, there are personality cults, definitely. But I think it is wrong that would be very one-sided to say, to call that the adoration of some football players, or when the masses make that pilgrimage into the big sports stadiums, or half the world watches some football matches, that those people are role models. I must admit, to some young kids certainly, but to many others who watch it, they say, okay, we admire the muscle man, we admire the physicality, and that's more important than anything to us. In addition, it's a wonderful part-time, and we cannot live without that part-time. And it would be very hard to have not that part-time to fill the void, which comes automatically when you have no God. It seems the human being must have something to pursue, and but this is only one small aspect of the golden calf. And Abdrushin himself, he gives some hints to where we have to look for the golden calf. It is also in that from the first commandment where he writes, where he gives us an interpretation, and he says then, perhaps people think of demon worshippers and others similarly gone astray when they think of people worshipping something other but God, at best calling them to mind with pity, but he does not include himself among them. Just take a look at yourselves calmly for once and examine yourselves as to whether perchance you belong to them after all, to the people who worship something else than the true God. One has a child who really means more to him than anything. For him he could make any sacrifice, forgetting all else. Another sets earthly pleasures far above everything, and with the best volition would be in the end be absolutely incapable of renouncing this pleasure for anything, if he were faced with such a challenge as afforded him voluntary decision. A third again loves money, a fourth power, a fifth a woman, another earthly distinction, and again in all these things they all ultimately love only themselves. That is idolatry in the truest sense. The first commandment warns against it, forbids it, and woe to him who does not obey it to the letter. So he's given many hints what is that golden calf, and it could be, he says, it's the woman, power, money, luxury life, and you cannot live without it, and you become dependent on it, and actually once that dependence has become so strong that you cannot live without it, and you seek for that power, and or you seek that wealth, or you seek that those titles, you try to be revered by other human beings because of your erudition or something, and you become a professor, doctor something, and when you are being introduced, they tell the whole career where you did your PhD, where you did your thesis, and where you got your professorship, and so on. So this is the things. Those are some of the things we acclaim today, and which are very important to us today. And in that last example, I've gave the doctor in front of your name, or the professor, doctor in front of the name. That's of course a distinction created by human beings, and the human beings decorate themselves with it. And there it's quite clearly seen that this is ultimately a love for ourselves. We like to be acclaimed, praised, and revered because of our erudition and knowledge about in a certain restricted field. And we like to receive prizes for it, and like to talk, and like that people look up in admiration to us. And there it is really that behind all that is vanity, or the love for yourself. The same thing is with that cool guy with the sunglasses driving with the big car, on the boulevard in Miami Beach or somewhere in Miami, and tries to be cool. He just likes to impress other people and and draw the admiration to himself. And look who I am, what cool guy I am. the number one person here in Miami Beach or in this district. And behind it, you always find an ego, or as Apushin writes here, you find love for thyself. So I think I would stop with that and I would say most of the time it is love for thyself to be admired by other human beings and be distinguished by them for all kinds of reasons, that even criminal behavior you can interpret like this. The the small criminal who is terribly brutal and demands respect from everyone, at least in his little streets where he's the king, the street king. He makes himself to a king and says, here I have a position of respect, and I create that position of respect with my gun. Also behind that behavior, there's nothing but a big ego, too big an ego. And I think what we have to learn is to find our place, that we are not that important. If you start comparing yourself with the greatness of the Creator, with the greatness of God, then your big ego shrinks and you find your proper place, which is just one small wheel in creation, an important wheel, but a small wheel where we should be useful. And there, once you have this small place, you don't think of yourself as very big, and you have started to understand the greatness, the infinite greatness of the Creator himself. So for some reason we have lost this sense of the infinite greatness of the Creator and have started looking at ourselves and blowing up our egos and deeming ourselves very important. And it seems every human being is infested by this self-love, by trying to make himself blown up. I'll pass it back to you now.
Thank you, Brother Rainer. Brother Greg, I want to go a little bit further from what Brother Rainer has just been talking about. So he's told us that we somehow want to show off, and receive acknowledgement for what we have achieved, or just want to show off, basically, as human beings, sort of like we are worthy of something. And Brother Rainer has pointed out that really, compared to greatness of God, of course, we are quite small and nothing. So what I want to ask you is then, what are the consequences of this sort of self-love? In a way, the word appreciation, or you think about the word appreciation about yourself or something, on the surface it doesn't sound that terrible, unless you sort of overdo it, maybe, and so what could be the sort of the implication is, by thinking you're loving yourself, self-love, there's something negative about it. So can you tell us about that?
Well, when one examines it very carefully, instead of one to direct one's gaze upwards towards the source, one now sort of blocks or obstructs that inward looking upwards to oneself. It's like one getting into a sack, a container, and sort of partially, tying the top of that sack. So you now have a situation where the personality is unable to see further, is unable to understand what lies beyond its immediate boundary. The consequences of that is that one's view becomes very narrow, and many a thing, the graces which had been granted to man in his journey from starting as an unconscious spirit gem to true consciousness and becoming a self-conscious spirit gem, that is inhibited because it's as if it is now stuck. It's unable to perceive all the helps around it. That tends to choke the spirit, for it doesn't look upwards anymore, or even if it does, it's unable to recognize the power in the proper way. And as long as there's a lack of the correct recognition, then you have a scenario where whatever has been placed there to be of help is ignored. That is what you find when one focuses on himself only and ignores the power that streams from above. The consequences of this are manifold. First, you will find that the lack of recognition, first limits its perception. And that is what has happened when the human spirit, through indolence and only focusing on itself, is unable to develop properly. For it's like someone who, instead of breathing in and breathing out, decides to breathe in only and not breathe out. So the balance between what streams from outside and what he himself gives, and all complications arise from there, which now leads to a quagmire which may choke the developing human spirit, which may even lead to complete lack of recognition. Such chokiness one may refer to as near spiritual death because it's unable to move further. Whereas if it were open, it's able to perceive all the helps that tend to lead him further towards its home as a self-conscious human spirit. For when one examines these things very carefully, steps have been put in place where the human spirit can find help. But if it refuses to make use of this help, then it's unable to accomplish the task which has been set for it to become self-conscious. So the consequences, they are so manifold. Ill health, unable to proceed further, and in fact, all the wrongs start from there.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. You covered quite a bit there. And I'm just going to tell the listeners, dear listeners, you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And the topic for discussion tonight is what it is to worship other gods. That's with a little g. I'm sure you know that anyway. Just to clarify that. So what it is to worship other gods. And you can join us in the discussion or comments if you want. The number here to contact us in UK, it is 079 444 31366. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. And we actually would love you to join us because we want to hear from what you would want to talk about, what you maybe want to have a deep understanding on this topic, or just say what you would like, what your own understanding is, so that maybe we can add to that. So I want to go to you, Brother Reiner, now, and I want to explore a little bit of a slightly different angle. We've talked about, these other little gods with a little g, and what are the consequences of falling for that, or going in that direction. And the thing is, this is about worship. So what I want to really get to is, what is it within the human being that wants to worship, or have worship, or want to be worshipped. So is it that they get some joy or ecstasy, or what is it that draws them to that? Let's say, if you focus on, let's say, somebody loving his child, or they love money, or whatever they love, the earthly things that we talk about. What does that provide them with? That they're attracted to it so much. So is it some, yeah? So, and then we can then talk about, Brother Rainer, differentiate that with the worship of God, which is what. But let's go focus on this one first. So, Brother Rainer, what do they get from worshipping the little g gods? Let's say, golden calf, as you put it.
Golden calf, as it's written in the Bible.
Yes.
In what I read, and I like the answer he's given there, Abdrushin, which is then, and again, in all these things, they all ultimately love only themselves. So it's one of the basic things underneath is vanity, and it's not very much used today in psychology, but nonetheless, I think it's a very important notion to understand human behavior, that vanity is at the root of so many things. Practically all of us has been infested by that vanity, and you can look at the shapes of cars. They are just to impress, to be brutal and aggressive, to intimidate the other person. Look, I'm the number one, I'm the alpha animal. I'm the big male with the treble exhaust, I can push my arm in. And those things. Behind that shape, behind that form of that car, is really the vanity of the human. They want to be special, they want to be big. That's one very big driving factor. And the word worshipping then, worshipping wealth, or worshipping power, or worshipping being the king of the road or something, any kind of king, we must look down. Behind those are that striving of the human being. And one of the biggest forces is, of course, vanity, to be something special, to be in front of other human beings. You do not try to be great in front of God or the laws of creation, creationally valuable. You try to be big in front of the human beings. You are the big football star who's paid $3 million for, I don't know, in a week, earns more than 10 American presidents and 10 bankers together. Or you are something else, or you like to show off your wealth. It's that motive of vanity. And if you talk worship is a very abstract term. Of course, they don't worship the money or the wealth, and kneel down before it. Worshipping is simply having reverence for it, revering it. It is important to them. They made it important, so important that they put it above God, really, and they keep forgetting God. If you even ask them, they probably would object to that statement and say, "Oh, I'll never forgive God. I just I just care about this and that thing so much, but I'm not forgetting God about it." But inwardly, you have lost this gaze upward. This gaze upwards towards the light is very important, and to ask yourself always in what you do, to open your intuition, your intuitive perception, your emotional sensitivity. With that emotional sensitivity, you can perceive what really you should do, and tune into that will of God and do something which is valuable for creation, and not something which is valuable just to so that you are looked at and admired. The admiration goes through it all, that you are gazed at. And many a brutal and even a brutal act or horrific act, I think, is just perpetrated by this desire underneath to become a center for attention and have this one moment of greatness. I'm just thinking now of this. There was a terrible thing happened about 1.5 years ago here in Europe, where a co-pilot was flying with a pilot with a full plane from Spain towards Germany, Cologne, quite near to here, and that real pilot, the main pilot, had to go out to the toilet, and in that moment, the co-pilot decided to 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 direct the plane straight towards the ground, and the plane dropped and it was going straight down, and the pilot couldn't enter because of 10/11 and those awful things there. The doors couldn't be opened anymore from the outside, so the real pilot couldn't open the door, and the pilot was just in a suicide attempt or in a suicide mission, directing the plane with the 200 people downwards and ramming it into the ground, into the Alps. And 200, I don't know, 200 people were dead, something like this, all of them. And he was suicidal, he had a depression. But what is the motive behind such a thing? That went really through many people's thinking. It was asked in the press, why, if he wanted to commit suicide, did he make this enormous big bang exit out of life, taking 200 people with him? And in the end, I just came to the conclusion he wanted to exit with a big fanfare. He was a vain person. He was driven by vanity in spite of his depression. And he wanted to say, if I go out with a big bang. And he got the big bang. He was then talked about for months in the press, and it was examined. But I think if one looks deep enough, one finds those old notions which are now forgotten in psychology, but which have been very well written about in European literature. Like we have books like The Vanity Fair, for example, that really describe some very true aspect, that underneath many of our actions, which on the surface don't look like this, there is just self-love and vanity hidden behind it. And one should not dismiss it as not a great motive in human beings to do things, even very terrible things. So I pause here, and I think I'll pass it back, but I would like to later on, Brother Greg just mentioned, through this self-love, of course, we witter, trifle away our time, and we even bind ourselves, and that is written further on in this treatment of the first commandment of Abdushin, of the dangers. The dangers are enormous of that thing, and of following those other gods, and especially that big ego, putting that big ego above everything. Me before God, but it's very difficult to see but that's that's behind most and many actions of human beings. Okay, I'll pass it back to you, Saad.
Thank you very much, Brother Reiner, for that. Um, okay, I'll go back to Brother Gregory now. Um, I want to shift the focus a little bit again. Now, Brother Gregory, we know, let's say, in the ancient peoples like the Romans, Greeks, Hindus, I know Hindus are still around, they believe in these, um, um, let's say, gods with a little g, many thousands of gods, for all different things, whether you name it, there's a god for all of them. So, and they used to worship, or at least say the old Greeks and the Romans, they used to worship that, and the Hindus, of course, they still worship God. And I want to say, first ask you, is that right what they did? And number two, the Hindus, they, in addition, they do know about the supreme one God as well, apart from the little gods we are talking about. So, so yes, Brother Gregory, can you first tell us about those? Is it okay? Is it right? Those people, maybe they didn't know about the supreme God in the early times, and so they worship those other gods, what they call gods, the little gods. Can you tell us about that? That's to Brother Gregory.
Well, at the times you mentioned, one should understand that there was the development of the human spirit, and as they grew, they came to recognize that there were certain powers, or they were able to perceive some beings. Through these beings, much power, much energy exuded, and they stuck to these beings, all right, in their consideration, assuming that these beings were the source of all power. But as they matured further, they found that there were other beings who stood higher. The key point here is that as they matured, as these peoples, these different groups matured, they kept discovering higher and higher and higher beings who stood above the ones they had already recognized, until they came to a point where their perceptions couldn't go further, which was a form of limitation of their ability to perceive further. With that, maybe it should have been clear to them that there was, or there is, only one power. But at that time, it was in place because that was their limit of understanding. That was the limit of their maturity. But as time went on, were they able to examine whatever was presented to them, like it is said, by their actions or by their activities we shall know them? Had they followed such a principle, they themselves would have come to a finer recognition and would have been shown that all power comes from one source. The world is matured enough at this present time to be able to recognize that all power comes from one source. So there are many who, due to indolence, have sunk back to that initial level where they were able to recognize beings who were transit points of this power. Along the line, there came others who, as prophets, were able to bear witness to this, and others who were able, through their activities, to show that this power streams from one source. All that needed then was for those listeners to examine the words aright. But that didn't happen. So we now have here in this world, or here on earth, a scenario where we have an uneven maturity. And there are people who still hold on to the old teachings and still hold on to the recognitions of their forefathers and have not moved from there. Whereas there are some who have examined further what is available and have come to a better understanding that all power comes from one source. So you now have a situation where you have works which have been made available, such works like we now have in the light of truth, the grail message, which tends or which explains all that is necessary to understand, provides that the person examining the work does so without being partial, provided that the person examining the work does so very rigorously, all right, and then come to final conclusion. So it's a question of the inner movement. However, it is necessary first to explain what man is. Man in flesh and blood here on earth, which one may refer to as an earth man, what is seen is only the outer covering or the instruments that the inner core, which is referred to as spirit, uses here on earth to experience. To experience, that means it's going through a process of development such that it started as an unconscious spirit gem, now to the states of consciousness of its surrounding, and proceeding further to self-consciousness. And in that process is able to make use of its physical body, which is only an instrument. And in this physical body, there is a final instrument which is called the intellect. So you now have a scenario in which the inner core of man, which is called the spirit, is able to communicate with the intellect. As long as this communication is seamless, then maturity is seamless. If, however, is a one-sided or is partially impaired, then we have the sort of quagmire that we have found here on earth. So there is the need to have a clear picture or a complete picture of what man is and what it has come to do. With that, all the distorted pictures that has been put in place will vanish, provided that the one doing the examination does so very rigorously as to come to personal convictions that indeed this is it. I will want to stop there.
Thank you, Brother Gregory, for that. Dear listeners, if you want to know more of the Grail message or get a copy for yourself, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. Sorry, www.grailmessage.com. I'm going to spell that. So that's www.grail, Grail, message, message.com. age.com. Um,
Can I
again,
just add
ye-
add something to what Brother Greg said?
yes, of course. Go ahead.
Um, I think it's a very important thought and a completely unknown thought, of course, to us human beings, that he said, that he pointed out that we are here to develop, and that we develop from an unconscious spirit germ, and to on a long way to through repeated lives here on earth to consciousness and self-consciousness, and then to self-consciousness to such an extent that we, by our own free will, do those things, only those things which are right. And we've got in us, he said that also, I'm using a little some other words, we have this instrument, the emotional sensitivity to weigh things, and the spirit weighs only through intuition, not through intellectual reasoning, through intuition, through, in fact, through emotional things, through perceiving things like peacefulness, or it's good, it's upbuilding, or this is destructiveness. We can perceive that on an emotional level, and that's our spirit doing that. But we have matured, and he was saying, in very long past times, of course, people have matured upwardly and have started seeing those beings outside which are not human, which they called gods. And in Europe we see the big temples in Italy and in Greek, where they had the oracles, and they had those gods like Zeus or Astarte or Apollo or the Isis cult in um, in Egypt. And I do not know much about it, but I feel very much drawn to it, and I would like to know more, because those people had something which we do not have today. They still could see at one time, those priests, they could see those gods and commune with them. And then, of course, through that, and that was when the temples were created, and when that knowledge came. They discovered that knowledge. There is something like Apollo. There is something like the Olymp, where the seat of the gods above. That is not fiction, and that is not to explain um, some natural facts, as people today say very often, but they actually could see them. They were realities, and they could commune with that. And like this, there was a lovely give and take with the surroundings, with those natural beings, with nature around, and they helped the human beings. And through the intellect and the one-sided growth of the intellect, and that's a real golden calf, the celebration of the intellect nowadays, that's that wrong God, the intellect, then, and the cultivation of the intellect, we could less and less perceive of those mythical gods around us. And in fact, they were not mythical at the start, they were reality, and then they became myths, and then the priests could not see them anymore and just pretended to see them. And we know all those things, and people began to doubt, and they became more and more intellectually um, clever, and relied on their clever intellect and on this technical knowledge, and they lost all the connections. And today we know, of course, about the God, but in one way we are terribly isolated from all those beings around us. And I definitely believe personally that we have to come back to a reuniting with those beings, with the elves and with the dwarfs, and what all the old people knew, existed, and could communicate with. And we have to learn those communication again. And then, of course, life would be much, much more fulfilled, because I think to see even a little flower elf is a million times more exciting than to see Lady Gaga um, strutting around, or Madonna. And and so on one hand, it's very difficult to say we have matured. I would almost more say we have so lost the way that we are completely cut off from those nature beings and have relegated them into the realm of fantasy, or of clumsy ways trying to explain natural phenomena. But but actually, the Grail message tells us they are realities and they are there, and we should connect with those people again. It's a long way to do, but a very exciting, very beautiful way to go ahead. So it's perhaps, in one way, I think we have terribly retrogressed from those times when those gods were still with the human beings, and the human beings had contact and communication with those gods through those wonderful high priestesses. And I still, even today, seeing those temples in Greece, they are awe-inspiring in their beauty. And so hopefully, and those cults were not worthless cults. They could be very wonderful, and to the people who visited those at the time when they were still really alive, and when there was really the communication with those powers. Of course, then once you proceed above that level, you realize that those so-called gods are only servants of that one God very high above. But we must not dismiss all those little things. And even in Nigeria, someone told me some long time ago, he said that a friend of him, he had a little animistic being, or some being which could make a flash of lightning, a small one, of course, an electric discharge um, of some Nigeria very low God, probably. But it's wonderful that people have that exchange with those nature beings, still to some very limited extent in some cultures. And he said, as a Nigerian, he told me once that he was very glad about the Grail message, because the Grail message did not wipe away those gods and relegated them into the realm of myth, but said they exist, and what you are seeing there and what you have in your Nigerian, wherever he lived, that's a reality, and you should cultivate that connection with that reality. And like this also, the recognition of that one God, then wiping out all the other gods like some religions did, that is a wrong thing. We should really, we have to reconnect to those realities, those gods which are really servants of that one God, but they exist, and it's only in our emotional blindness, and which stops us from seeing them, at least at times. Okay, I'll pass it back now.
Yes. Thank you, Brother Rainer. Yeah, you did sort of read my mind there, so thank you for that. Because I wanted to follow on from what Brother Gregory said about, you know, those, he was talking about the development, like you said, from the little gods, the, let's say, nature gods and such, and to the one supreme God that we know, we are aware of. So, and so you don't dismiss those um, uh, nature gods, if I can put it in a little term like that, to call them that. So I want to continue with you, Brother Ryan, actually. Trying to think on that. So, in a way, from where you just finished, because I mean, in the world we live today, like science is the God, you could say, and which you already mentioned is the intellect, and you know, and we've actually cut ourselves off, because hardly anybody today is really can say they can see these little the nature gods that we've just been talking about. And yet you said how important it is that we should have that, all the steps from the ancient peoples, which they were aware of, they could even see them, they were conscious of them, then they somehow lost that, and of course we inherited that in the world we live now. And and then of course there are many religions talking about the one God, or spiritual beliefs with the one God, but they have no connection at all with the nature gods, and and Brother Gregory mentioned that there's supposed to be a maturing, where the people who see let's say in the early time when they saw those nature gods, then they would recognize later that there's actually other higher gods above them. Again, we put this all in little g God, of course. So the higher beings, let's say, and higher beings above them as they went higher and higher, but then they didn't reach to see the supreme, Almighty. And so what I want to ask you on that, Brother Rainer, is, the Supreme Almighty, we say is invisible, or, the other little nature gods, people could even see them. Not now, obviously, so much, but they could see it in the early times, in those times. And now we are supposed to mature enough to have this recognition of the one Supreme God, which we can't sense or see. And so, science can dismiss it and say, look, that's you're just figment of your imagination, or your own presumption, and it's not real. So how can we really be sure about this, that there is the Supreme Being, and as I said, we've even lost connection with the lower gods, the nature gods. So how can we actually get to that point that we have it as a real reality for us, and not something like a blind faith?
That's that's a difficult.
And just sorry to cut you there, because we're talking about
please.
worship. I'm sorry, because we're talking about worship, and worship the golden calf, which we all see, all the examples of the golden calf, which is all physically visible to us, and and yet which we are not meant to worship, and yet we are meant to. The true worship is meant to be for the Almighty God, which we cannot see. So it's like, it's like.
There are some things which we'll never be able to see, however developed we are, which Abdushin very well explains, and which is simply because they are above where we came from, above our origin. Our origin is in the luminous heights, in some plane or sphere, which has sometimes been labeled the Garden Eden. But above that, it goes on and on and on. We couldn't exist there simply because we would dissolve. We just do not have the strength to come nearer to the source of all light. So we will never be able to see God. But nonetheless, we have the capability to come to the recognition of God. Now, this is very difficult to understand who has not read the Grail message, or does not know at least about it. But if we keep our hearts pure, we can see the workings of God all around us, and that world around us actually opens up. It becomes more wondrous and more wondrous and more wonderful and more wonderful and more beautiful. It's still the same world with all the problems it has, but we will see everything different. And this capability we have, and we can see by looking at things here in life, we will recognize the Creator, and we will come to recognition. That is really the important thing. We can come to recognition by looking at the things. But this is in hand with our spiritual maturing. If we have completely spiritually matured, we are in full recognition and full conviction that there is God. And then you only have to look at the smallest things. You don't have to look at big things, and there is no scientific proof to the intellect, it cannot be proved to the intellect. You have to have an open heart, and then you can see how sand is blown through the desert or just in front of your doorstep, how the wind moves there, and how things stir, and leaves fall from the trees. You can see a miracle, a real miracle, and a world which tells you of God and tells you that God exists, and you will come to the recognition there. And so in a way, if we change if we mature with that maturation process, we also start seeing the world differently and become more and more to a recognition of God and a conviction that there is God. And we can also see then how the intellect works. The intellect tries, of course, the scientists know there is a force. They somehow, and they know there's an unlimited force. We know, they recognize there are fields all around, fields of energy, and one would be a gravitational field. And this gravitational field is energy. And where does this energy come from, which makes the objects move of the universe in a certain direction? Here an apple falls to the ground, but it keeps whole galaxies together, and it keeps whole things together. It's all forces, and they recognize it. Only they just label it something and say, oh, it's a fluctuation of quantum fluctuations or something. They have to come up with something. And you can go on and ask, yeah, where does this come from? So science recognizes there is an enormous force, and they also know there is a force coming in. They know that the universe is expanding, which you cannot explain in material things, and it's becoming not less. If it's expanding and it would be always the same amount of mass and energy, it would become thinner and thinner and thinner. But it does not. It has the same density of energy. It has the same density of matter, although it's expanding all the time. So they know all that. And they are in a conundrum. Now you can very easily say, oh, this energy, it must come from some invisible sphere, which we cannot detect, attach, but which we cannot detect with our instruments. And it just flows continuously into that quantum world and gross material world, and that's why why it's so strange in that quantum world, because it's just on the limit, in touch with that other thing, and particles disappear and appear out of nothing and disappear into nothing again. And that always shows this particle is also a little thing, we can measure, a cloak, which builds around some force which is inside, and some we can see, but sometimes they also disappear. Where do they disappear to? Where does the energy go? And they say, oh, there's just some unlimited field behind it. But what is that unlimited field? And since it's becoming bigger and bigger, the universe, any reasonable person must say, oh, it cannot be a closed system. It must be an open system. And there must be an influx of energy into that visible universe we are in. But science, being completely celebrating and worshipping the intellect, will never admit it. They will go to the most unbelievable to the most unbelievable pronouncements, and rather believe those than accepting that there is something beyond the observable. So, and this is just the domination of the intellect, and the science serving the intellect and being at the moment completely hostile to the idea of a God. And but at least the idea of that force which is outside the detectable universe detectable by means, that would be already a big step. But here they also dodge around, although they admit it is there. So I better stop here, because I'm not a scientist who knows in detail quantum theory, but so far I think what I outlined is correct.
Thank you, Brother Rainer.
May
Yes,
I just add a bit
sure.
to draw our attention that the so-called science confirms um, that there is energy, and and that in its workings, particularly in the field of so-called physics, it has laws, which laws has helped it to discover many other things. On one of the primary law, which he says that energy can never be created nor destroyed, but may be, transformed from one state to another state. That is the canon law in physics, upon which many other things are discovered, the states of many other things. So it is very basic in physics. Now, when you examine that law in physics, which says energy cannot be created, it all means that it's already there. So if energy cannot be created, it means we know it already exists. If it already exists, and from now we know that energy is spirit, it means spirit cannot be created nor destroyed. At that low level, science so-called admits that spirit exists, for it acknowledges that energy exists before matter precipitated. Therefore, there is no contradiction. What has been around is the misinterpretation of the recognitions of science. So as long as we have a correct interpretation based on their recognition, that basic law admits that energy exists, all right, and cannot be created. It means, therefore, that that energy has always been there, independent of time, because it was always there. And it is the source, the final source of this energy, or let us say of spirit. That is what we are referring to in our discussions. So indirectly, science has admitted it, but has interpreted it wrongly. Without that law, science of physics is unable to discover many things and unable to move forward, be it so-called gravitational fields or quantum theory, which remain theory. That law still holds. So one just thought this should be pointed out to show that indeed there is consistency, but there is a misrepresentation and a misinterpretation of that which has been recognized. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brother Gregory, for that. Dear listeners, you're listening to Blessed Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdul Sheen. If you want to know more about the Grail message or want to get a copy for yourself, you can go to this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll say that again, www.grailmessage.com. I'm going to spell it as well, which is www.grail, which is GRAIL, message, MESSAGE.com. And the topic for discussion tonight, it is what it is to worship other gods. And you can join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us here in UK, it is 079 444 313 66. And that's, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. And just to let you know, we are also broadcasting live on YouTube. You go to youtube.com and search for Bless Radio 1, and then look for Bless Radio 1 live stream, and that's the live stream that's when the show is live. And if you want to listen to the show afterwards, normally about 10 minutes after the show, there's a recording which you can look for again on YouTube, which is of course youtube.com. Then you go to Bless Radio 1, search for Bless Radio 1, and then under that search for Bro Saad, BRO Saad, SAAD, and the grail message, and also look for the topic. Again, the topic tonight is what it is to worship other gods. And also there's another website which broadcasts the radio station, which is tunein.com, and under tunein.com you go and search for Bless FM, and then you can hear live on that as well. So I want to go back to Brother Gregory now. Brother Gregory, again, I'm looking for another angle to worshipping other gods, like we've been talking about. So this time, in the Catholic faith, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is referred to as Mother of God, and she's revered and called Holy Mother, and even they're dedicating festivities to celebrate this. So, just basically, is that right? And how is it? What are they doing that? What are they doing when they do that sort of activity? That's to Brother Gregory.
Well, people have their free will to decide on how they themselves wish to move forward. And therefore, those who hold onto the Catholic faith have their free will to hold on to their views, even if they come around and say the sun revolves around the earth, and whoever does not hold that view must be punished. One still admits they are entitled to their views. So one cannot chastise them for that. But each personality needs to examine whatever they themselves hold very dear and come to a final conclusion. And with the case of Mary, the mother of Jesus, what you have is that many, using their human ways of doing things, think instead of obeying the advice or following the advice that Jesus himself has given, that it is the law of the Almighty that holds, and that he himself has come to fulfill the will of the Almighty. They should have learned from that, but many still prefer not to go directly, but will be cutting favors by moving towards the mother of Jesus, thinking that the mother of Jesus can now act as an emissary through the back door, and by inflaming the importance of the mother of Jesus, they themselves can get to Jesus himself. But as Jesus himself made very clear, only those who fulfill the will of my Father. All right? He kept referring to that rather than those who tried to come through my mom. So it is now left for each one to decide for himself or herself whether they wish to fulfill the will of the Father who sent Jesus himself, or to follow a group of people who decide to frame something and go behind Jesus, go to his mom, and with all sort of adjective, thinking that one will grant them favor before Jesus and then grant them favor before the Lord Almighty. So one has to understand human behavior very carefully. And all this springs from indolence. For the Lord made it very clear, only the will of my Father, rather than going through all other routes. For those who fulfill the will of his Father, they will find their way as matured human spirits. For those who do not fulfill the will of his Father, even if they come through the mother, then they are in dire trouble because they will not find their way. One wouldn't want to go and start dissecting whatever the Catholics hold there or not hold there. But one is at liberty to take the true teachings of Christ and hold that as consistent with the values that he brought, and that alone should hold.
And what I feel is about this is a bit weird that Jesus has come, and obviously being the Son of God, he's pointing the way, and then somehow Mary has become as important. Mary, the mother of Jesus, here, and it's like and that is not like what can I say? It's like they, rather than focus on what the way is meant to be, they're more focusing on a personality, and and that personality is not even close to the Jesus in the sense of, I mean, basically we know she's a human being, Mary, and not.
May I say that Mary, the mother of Jesus, should be left alone. But whoever wishes to hold on to Mary because they themselves are too lazy, that is their decision. But Mary should not be brought into the contest at all, because Jesus made it very clear, absolutely clear, the will of his Father. Therefore, human opinions cannot change the will of his Father, which are hewn into the laws of creation, or which are themselves the laws of creation or the laws of nature, through which first the human spirit came into existence. Therefore, Mary should be left alone. All right, she herself went through transformation and made a lot of sacrifice through being the mother of Jesus Christ. So she will be left out of all this. If, however, many are still too indolent, then we have this golden calf of self-importance. And this selfishness or vanity, the human vanity, which keeps bringing Mary into the equation. The key thing, like he said, the will of his Father. So what should be discussed is the will of his Father, rather than bringing Mary and start dissecting whether those who follow Mary or who go through Mary begging, and if they plead with Mary, Mary will now plead with Jesus. Those are human frailties which has never held and will never hold. So it will be of no benefit to anyone, whether they are Catholics or not. For the laws of creation are impartial. They are invariant. They have always been from the beginning and will always be there. So it is that which is permanent, which one should discuss, rather than, attach oneself to that which is so transient, which in fact is false.
Thank you. And I want to follow on that, Brother Gregory, to you, this sort of, because it's a related question, really. There are some people who have been called saints, in all faiths. Not any one specific faith. So, and people visit, they're like, some of them have their shrines and so on, and they're considered to be, pious people and, leading the way in their faith. So, should they be revered and celebrated? I mean, they're not. I'm not calling these people God now. They're just, should they be recognized in any way, Brother Gregory, or is just again
the question is, should they be recognized? The key thing we have always stressed, which should be important, are the laws of creation, not the personalities who, for one way or the other, have done a bit here or have demonstrated their faith. The demonstration of faith is personal. There are only two ways. You swing unconditionally in the will of your Creator and move closer to final recognition until you become self-conscious and live thereafter in paradise as a self-conscious spirit or human spirit, or you do not swing unconditionally and you are now tied here in the world of matter, unable to make any progress. To say that you are following one person or the other is of no help, for the laws through which you came into existence, into being, are very clear. Again, it is trying to follow one person or the other, thinking that that person has become so high. These are the golden calves that have been mentioned again and again. Thou shalt have no other one. Your man's attention must be directed to the source of all being, the source through which all the power that activates, that moves creation, arises from. So, why is there a need to hold on to somebody's other's beliefs without due examination? Such will only bind that particular personality or that human spirit, unless that human spirit is at a height which is strong enough to be able to sort of draw fellow human spirits here on earth. However, the key thing is, first, one needs to examine for himself to understand, to recognize the laws of creation through which they have come into being, to recognize what they have come here to do, and then follow the path. And that is why we now have works like In the Light of Truth, the Grail message, to help us to elucidate all these corners such that there will be no confusion anymore. It didn't say it should be accepted just like that, but should be examined with all one's intuition, with all one's intellect. With that, most of this followership without understanding will stop. So saying someone is has come to higher recognition, and then you bind oneself to that particular person, is of no help. For the laws of creation that have made sure that that person has used in coming to that recognition, it is same laws of creation that you who are admiring that person should adhere to and see where things take you. So these are all the confusion which have been woven into many teachings and has been causing confusion for a very long time. The earlier that these things are done away with, the better.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. And Brother Rainer, to you now. I've got another thing which, in a way, Brother Gregory, I would say, has looked at it already, but I just want to explore it as still. And that is that in the world of today, there are many spiritual movements with their leaders, and some of them, the leaders, they're considered by their followers to be enlightened masters, and even some of them think that this is like incarnation of God on the earth, a bit like Jesus, you can say. And so basically high human beings on the earth who have come to, well, bring enlightenment, I guess that's what it is. And but there's many of them, Brother Rainer, and well, I guess my question at the end of the day is, how do you know if it's true? Which of them is true, and are they really? I know some of the followers are worshipping them, but I want to put that to the side because Brother Gregory, I think, has very well answered that already. So I just want to ask on that level that they are supposed to be these high human beings, enlightened masters on the earth, with some of them with very similar teachings and so on. But how can we sort of distinguish if maybe they're all meant to benefit in one way or the other, for different people? It's like food. You taste some things you enjoy and somebody else enjoys something else. It's not like there's something better. One food is better than the other food. So are these like different paths? These different teachers are like different paths or different, all the variety of human beings that we have on this earth. Or is that not right? That's to Brother Rainer.
Well, I'm definitely not to pass judgment onto any movement, and I think to any person living now and feeling that he's lost his way, there will come many people. They might call themselves leaders, or they might even call themselves God incarnations or whatever. There are a whole lot of people who try to help and try to say, we know the answer, or we have the answer. And I include myself also as amongst those. I'm one of them. And but the task is really on the individual. He must listen with his heart and with all his heart and all his intellect, using his whole strength to examine those things and weigh those things, and really through weighing he can come to a conclusion. No, that is not right. Does it leave questions unanswered? And among those things on those writings, he will then come also. The grail message it's one of those things. Among those many prophets, there's also someone talking about the world teacher explaining the world, which the grail message claims, and that person can then check out also there, examine it and find, oh, there's substance behind it, and these are things which make sense. And I feel spiritually, I feel now appeased, a little bit more in peace. My worries have decreased a little less. He will start feeling the beneficial influence, and it's not an imagined influence. You must be very aware that it is not an imagined thing. Human beings are very wonderful in imagining all kinds of things. That is really substantive. That is a real difference between the grail message and the thing. Now, what we are doing here, how my words just bear witness to it. Many things which I say out of my present knowledge, my present understanding of this world. It's not perfect. It's knowledge of just a human being having lived for so and so many years with a certain type of maturity, having read the Grail message, but surely not understood or absorbed, not a small part of it. And but I feel quite at home here in this world through that experience with the Grail message, and I feel quite safe, and I could master my earth life here quite well. I'm very satisfied. The Grail message helped me on that. I just want to point the other person, if you examine all what those other people bring in, or those other prophets bring, check out the Grail message. Make it very objective and see with a very objective examination. You cannot come to a conclusion where there is gold and where there is just glittered stuff. But to make the difference between gold and glitter stuff, every human being has to do it, him or herself, and it's even his task to do that. It's a holy obligation to do it. We must search for the truth. If we do not do it, we are sinful. We sin against creation, and so I think that's the only thing I can say about it. I do not condemn them. I've read and examined some of them, not many. I found the Grail message, and that's then to each other human being on a completely personal level to examine those teachings, and if they are not satisfying, go to the next one, but also look at the Grail message, which I think is very different from the other ones. So
Thank you, Brother Ron.
Thanks, Mr. Reiner. I thought one should add a few more things.
Yes, please.
That there is the need to examine many other works. But one should also hold on to that examinations is not arbitrary. That whatever work is examined, the Grail message itself included, this work must be consistent, first with the laws of nature or the laws of creation. If these works are not consistent with the laws of nature or the laws of creation through which the examiner he himself came into existence, then that work cannot be right. That has always been the problem. That many will examine a piece of work and they have a semblance, even when all they have been told violates the laws of creation or laws of nature, they still accept it because you never can tell. Such will lead nowhere. Therefore, whatever is being examined, the framework or the basis must be the laws of nature, the laws of creation, through which every process, every particle, every personality, whatever exists, came into existence. For that is the purpose of creation itself. Even what is being discussed now should not be taken for granted and assume things may happen in an arbitrary manner and that anything can happen. That is very wrong. Anything cannot happen. It is only man who is capable of gross arbitrary actions and think they can get away with it. And that has been the bane of many a religion, because you now have a religion that tells you this and tells you that. And when you examine it, you find that you have a lot of inconsistencies. But out of fear, many remain silent. But for those who are bold enough, who will dare to examine the work in the light of truth, let them first understand, make clear to themselves what the laws of nature or the laws of creation are, and with that clarity, examine this work as rigorously as possible, never taking any sentence for granted. Only on such a basis can anyone come to a personal conviction which will not be shaken in times of problems, because he himself has built such strong posts, such strong pillars, that there is clarity within it, and no dogmatic ballast can shift him or her off what he or she has recognized. So things have to be made very clear that it is the laws of creation and only the laws of creation that one must compare any teaching with.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. When just there's a question that arises in me when you say you must compare with the laws of nature or laws of creation. It means you need to know what the laws are, isn't it?
Precisely.
So where do you know that? You know, I mean,
Yeah, I think
we didn't make those laws. So how do we find that? That what we
yeah,
Well, it is okay. Mr. Reiner, please go on.
yeah, I think the thing is, Abdushin explains those laws of creation in his work. That's in fact one of the core things. And as a seeker of a person lost in the forest, you do not know those laws of creation because you've never heard about it. No one knows them. No one knows even how creation is being built. This is all in the Grail message. But once you start reading it, what you will feel intuitively with your heart is that there is a knowledge you can rely on. And then after some time, you will see that up that Aftershin proposes a stringent, rigorous logicality. There's everything is logical, everything is understandable, understood correctly. Yes, understandable. We can follow it. There is no gaps, and suddenly you see already the world a little bit different. You see then in the other places where there are gaps, there are logical gaps. I mean, they even say blind faith and things like this, or to fill artificially those logical those gaps and build artificial bridges over it, and things which cannot be. So I think the touchstone is not really that you examine with the laws of creation, because those are being explained in the Grail message. The touchstone is simply your searching for the truth, your honest searching for the truth and for help in that situation where we are all lost in the woods. And your heart will tell you, because your heart, your intuitive perception will absorb something there which reassures. It will feel it comes from the light. There's something reverberating in you, which is in the Grail message. And this reverberation you will feel. Your spirit will feel it unconsciously, and you will go more and more, and clarity will be established. At one point, you then understand the laws of creation, and you can see much clearer the confusion around you and the desperate bridging of gaps and illogicalities. Um, in the other works, but also I would agree. I would tend more to 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 align with Brother Saad. It's the touchstone is your heart, which is seeking the truth, and because it came out of the light, it will recognize the light again. We were once our origin was very close to the light, much closer than we are to today, and we have those memories still in us, and the grail message will wake up memories, and those memories which are on the deepest level of yourself, and those memories will, those awakening of those memories, that is what will tell you, oh, there is more to it, let me read on and let me read on. And
Thank you for that. You use the words awaken. So what is awakened? It means there is something there which has not been in use, which already exists. What is now needed is the impetus to look into what already exists and use that one as a framework. And what already exists are the laws of creation, which now, through one's intuition, one awakens and things become much clearer. For it is already there. No one needs to teach anyone, any other person, that to stay alive, there is the need to breathe in and breathe out. That is a basic law. Whether in physics they call it conservation of energy, is immaterial. But for any person here on earth, for any body who is alive, be it plant or animal, be it stone that needs to exchange, this exchange thing has always been there. Only in the walk in the light of truth or through the teachings of Christ where these things are working. It means they've been there, lying dormant, unused. What we now have in the walk is to call your attention to them such that you have inner clarity and then use those ones as a framework. The Ten Commandments was only a representation of partial representation of this work, which is now made known to everyone. The teachings of Christ, when Christ was asked many questions, all these were made very clear. And Christ, in his way of doing things, made it explain this in parables. But only now in the walk are these laws awakened in such a clear manner that there should be no confusion.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. We come to the end of our show, so I'm going to ask my colleagues to say goodbye to the listeners. And would you like, so Brother Rainer, would you like to say anything to the listeners to say goodbye?
well, I just a simple goodbye from my side, and hope it's. No, I'm not saying anything about the weather.
Okay, all right.
I wish everybody a good week.
Thank you. And Brother Gregory, anything you'd like to say?
I wish everybody a very good week because it's still very warm.
Thank you.
So enjoy it before it changes.
Okay. And this is Brother Saad in the studio. Thank you, listeners, for listening to us tonight. Yes, we are back again next Tuesday, 6 p.m. UK time, with another topic. The topic, I haven't finalized this topic. Well, this is the, let's say, a draft version of the title I'm going to give. So here it is. So you're free to, this is something from the Grail message. I am using a, you could say, a quote or advice from the Grail message. You're free to wander in creation at your desire without harming others. That's the. I might change it a little bit when we do the show next week. But that's that's the main topic for next week's discussion. So please do join us again, and I wish everybody a great week. And Brother Sayom is next, and listen to him as well. All the best, everyone. Take care.